how we start thinking about shifting our perspectives in the classroom back, and I know many of you already have it there, but back towards what it is that we think education is about and what the purpose of education is for us. This is a year one class that I taught some years ago who made me shift my perceptions when I spent weeks planning something for a trip. We were taking them from Barnsley over to Salford, to the Lowry, and in fact I think I've got some of my skit trainees here who I've done the same trip with, but I didn't get it to lie on the floor. And even though I'd planned all this work round about Ellis Lowry's artwork, when those kids walked into that building, it was the building that blew them away. And that's what we wanted to look at. And our inquiry question had been about how art represents reality, and they suddenly were about how architecture represents their reality. And it was a salutary lesson for me as a teacher, because it made me think a lot more about being in the moment with children and responding to what they want and letting go of the plan. And that's quite a hard thing for us to do. And letting go of the plan is kind of what I want us to think about a little bit. But I want us to start off with this question of what is the purpose of education? You would think that we would have had a fairly clear steer from governments on this over the years, but actually no one's ever asked the question. Not officially, not putting forward to us a proper vision from government. I know Mick tried to do it when he was at QCA, and it was very quickly thrown out when a new government came in. But what is this constant thread that should run through our system about the purpose of education? So just have a moment, sit and talking to the person next to you, and think, why did I go into this job in the first place? What is the point of it? It's probably slightly unreasonable of me to give you 30 seconds to come to a conclusion on one of the most difficult questions you have. And you could have talked about that for the whole hour and I'd walked away and gone, well, I needn't have planned anything because they took it away. But, did you say this?
Yes.
Because we could be forgiven for thinking that, couldn't we? Because isn't every moment of our working day in schools often feeling like the accountability, the testing is driving our actions? And then what is gained by putting children through that process, if not to simply make them obedient and compliant? And well-behaved is different to being obedient and compliant. And if I had time to do one on behaviour, we would do that as well. But I think it's about making sure that people don't lift their heads up far enough to see a horizon that is different to the one we exist. It's about people not changing the status quo, about being able to go out into adulthood and see that there might be another way of doing things. And if we keep everyone busy, teachers and children, then what you end up with is compliance and an unwillingness to change things because you can't imagine a different reality. So, at the other end of the scale, some people say, oh, we should throw out testing altogether, we should throw out exams altogether, and we need more creativity and we just want happy children. And it sounds really lovely, but actually it's not enough. You can be creative and happy and wreak havoc in the world. There are dictators throughout time and place who have wreaked havoc throughout the world that have been perfectly happy and they've been hugely creative in their solutions to problems that they perceive. So, I wonder if what we're looking for and what you talked about, and I suspect what you talked about was more aligned with this, if actually what we're looking to achieve is children who grow up into adults who have wisdom rather than intelligence, and the two are connected but different, wisdom, but crucially, who have the power and agency to see what can be changed in the world and to go forward and change it. And actually, I was really heartened in the general election last week that we seem to be seeing a swathe of young people coming through and thinking we can change the world. And that was a really positive thing to do. So we're clearly not messing up too badly, are we, if that's what's happening. So wisdom, what is it about wisdom that is different to intelligence? No one's saying, and it gets me really annoyed actually when I get accused of, or we get accused as a profession, a blobby profession, of not valuing knowledge, because knowledge is critical to wisdom. It's an important foundation for wisdom. But knowing what to do with that knowledge and acting with empathy, with integrity, with the capacity to reflect back on experience and use it, that's what takes you from being knowledgeable to wise. And I think children can be wise. We talk about old heads on young shoulders. They can be wise. But where do we give them the opportunity in the curriculum to practice wisdom explicitly? And that's kind of what I want to throw out to you today, because I would say placing children in dilemma, in difficulty, where they are safely navigating the way through problems is one way that we can do that. We know that we've got difficulties with mental health in our country. Every political party is agreed on it, and the evidence is growing stronger and stronger. And I won't kind of read through these these slides, but the fact that for the first time there is research suggesting that school stress is a significant cause of teenage suicides. We're seeing Childline reporting that exam stress for 10 and 11-year-olds is rising up through the reasons why they report mental health problems. We also know, and I am one of the 22%, I have to say, who increase their take alcohol in order to cope with stress. Since I'm math teaching, obviously I've drunk a lot less. But sleep problems, increasing, self-medicating with things that make you feel slightly better, having to medicate with antidepressants. When you stand up in front of children in a classroom, you are in a position where they want to see your authentic, trusted, respectful self, and that your relationship with those children is a partnership. And you're not in a state of mind to be able to give yourself fully to those children if this is something that you're experiencing. So when I talk about classrooms being dilemma-led, I'm also wanting us to think about classrooms that are led by joy, and that we're placing joyfulness into our classrooms, and that engagement isn't a dirty word, because actually children who are engaged, and that point of engaged confusion in your mind, where you almost get something but you're not quite sure, where something's presented to you in a slightly different or difficult way, is a really positive way to build agency and self-belief. So, how do we achieve these aims? This is a Year 2 class that I was teaching, and I've kept this photo for years because I just love that little boy's face. And he's an archaeologist, and they've got burned artefacts. They've come into school, and they are archaeologists who have excavated a site in London, and they're piecing their evidence together, and they discover that they found the objects that were dropped by a family fleeing from the Great Fire of London. And they're thinking about what that would have been like. And they came into school, and they walked into that space, and there was a piece of tinfoil on the door, and they had to put their thumbs on it, and I said, beep, and they were able to go through and get their authorised personnel badges. They know, they're not stupid, they know it's not thumbprint recognition technology that they're dealing with here. But what you're doing is building novelty, and novelty is really important in attracting children into learning. And once they get into that space, there's a difficulty, because it's not just finding out what happened. Then we have to piece together, where would they have gone? Here's a map of London. Here's where this site is. Where would they have gone? And the children, Year 2s, know that they would have gone to water. They know this. So the river. And then we're at the river, and there are boatmen, and the boatmen can only carry 4 people at a time. Well, which family are they going to choose? And then we carry on, and we learn about the Great Fire of London, and they learn the facts, they know the dates, they know the timelines, they know the impact of the fire on all kinds of areas of public life. And it gets to the point when we've had discussions about, well, did the fire help to end the plague? Did it lead to better safety regulations for buildings? Did it lead to the introduction of a fire service? Did it actually make the world a better place? Is it necessary sometimes for bad things to happen in order for good things to come out of them? We talk about these, and now it feels really prescient given what's happened in the past week. But the question at the end that those children are asked is, okay, here we are. The fire is starting, it's a flicker, and we can put it out. Should we put the fire out? Now, 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds can deal with that, but what they're thinking about is responsibility, and it's that not burden of responsibility, but the interest of responsibility, the interest of unpicking information that I think heightens learning away from just simply knowing facts to understanding wisdom. Does that make sense? There's no right or wrong answer. Some kids said, yes, we should put it out. Some kids said, we shouldn't. But the fact that they were prepared to discuss the reasons why was really significant. So I'm not totally against exams, but I think we have to be really, really careful about the weight we place on them. And we know that exams don't transfer from interproximal context, which basically means that children will learn something for a test but not necessarily transfer it to something else. And transference is one of the kind of big buzzwords at the moment. How do we get children to transfer? We know that exam boards are increasingly trying to put questions on papers that trick children. I use the word trick, they would say challenge them to be able to apply their knowledge in a different context. But whichever it is, if the transference isn't there, children can't do it. So my argument is we have a duty to place children in as many situations as possible in which they practice transference through a dilemma and through a difficult situation. I'm not even going to go into comparative outcomes because I could talk to you about that for an hour. So, this is how curriculum is made. A government minister is appointed. They want to impress because education is usually a stepping stone to something better, let's face it. Treasury or Foreign Office, because then you get to go out for loads of dinners in lots of exciting places. Or the leadership. And so, you try to impress, and you try to impress by making change as quickly as you can because you don't have very much time. And the changes that you tend to make tend to reflect back on your own experience. So what we see time and time again with education ministers is that they make changes to curriculum based on their own life experience. And so let's imagine for a moment, I am the newly appointed Secretary of Education. God, I would love that job. And so I can't toe a political line, that's my problem. And they liked apples. They like apples a lot. And actually they think that apples are good because that's British values, isn't it? I mean, what's more British than an apple? So, they put apples on the curriculum. And we all go, oh, that's all right, we can teach apples. But then, no, you're not trusted to teach the apple. What they'll do is give you a list of objectives and you tick them off and they'll put a test at the end of it. And we become our own worst enemies when we just go tick, 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 test, move on. I've covered it. Because that apple could be all kinds of things. If you slice it in half, you can see the golden ratio. And across the whole of nature, with seed heads and fruits and all kinds of patterns, you see Fibonacci sequences everywhere. The Eden Project does this brilliantly in Cornwall, maths in nature. So you could do a whole unit of work around that, mathematics in nature, and just using the apple as a starting point. Or you could say, why is it in the Bible that the apple is, it isn't mentioned at all? It's the fruit of knowledge. That is on the tree of knowledge, and Eve takes it. But why is it in all Western depictions of that story? In all the paintings, all the old masters' paintings, it's an apple. But in Eastern depictions, it's a pomegranate. And how does our flora and our fauna and our climate impact on our social and cultural icons, and how does that develop the stories that we tell throughout time? Or you could say, why is it that Apple computers have a logo not just of an apple, which has become synonymous with knowledge? That's why teachers get apples from their children traditionally. But it's an apple with a bite taken out of it. Is this computer company saying to us, here's knowledge, take it? And then why is knowledge dangerous? Do you see what I mean? I could go on about apples all day, actually. And if a government minister gave it to me, it's my responsibility as a teacher to make that as exciting for children as I possibly can. Because I've made it exciting for me. And that relationship, it's our duty to kind of find that relationship. And thinking very closely about motivation. Now, I nicked this from Carl Jarvis at the EOS Trust. And what Carl's done across his group of schools is to map over this original research that was about sports psychology and education. And he's looked at the impact on memory of different kinds of motivation based on the original scale that Valerard and his team worked upon. And what we find in schools is that the job of the teacher is often just seen to be from moving children from apathy to compliance. And if you move them from apathy, you lift up their heads from the desk and you get them to write a full page in their books, you feel like you've done your job. But all they've done is comply. And the motivation for that is simply usually to not get into trouble. And then beyond that, slightly more engaged level is the self-regulation that comes through not wanting to let somebody down, not wanting to let the parents down, not wanting to let their teacher down, not wanting to let themselves down. But the whole motivation is regulated through guilt and pressure and social pressure. And the retention for that level of motivation is low. But when you start to get into the realm where children start to identify goals, they start to be self-regulating, where they want to, need to, and have to learn because they're so interested there's just no other option, you don't have to keep repeating stuff to get them to remember it, because it becomes memorable in itself. And what we've got in education at the moment is a problem where what works, the question of what works, is really a question of what works in order to get children through tests as quickly as possible. Does that make sense? What if it was what works in terms of getting children to retain, remember, and make meaningful the learning that they've had? It's a very different kind of question. And I think that's where we need to kind of think about moving on. School 21, Joe Pardo's here today, and he's going to be talking about the work in School 21, and it blew me away when I went to see it. This chessboard is in their school hall, and all the pieces have been made by the children, and they are figures from the Cold War. And so in history and project-based learning, they've looked at the figures of the Cold War and what happened, but in art, they've been making these sculptures, these kind of slightly caricatured sculptures. But for me, the genius of the task is then, if these characters were on a chessboard, which pieces would they be? Who would be the king? Who were the pawns? Who had the power? And the level of debate, not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but the level of the debate that inspires for children is really astonishing. And that chessboard sits in the school hall and is played over and over again by those children. So I kind of want us to start thinking about going back to this idea of the purpose of education and thinking about the concepts that unite us all. The concepts of beauty. You know, I walked into a school the other day and children were looking at the question of, is India beautiful? And one of the children would come in saying, yes it is, look at this, I've got this clip, this video clip of kite flying, and it's magnificent. They make these gorgeous kites and they fly them through the cities and it's beautiful. And they put the pictures up, and then the children did some research, and they found that the kite flying is actually so competitive that some of the makers of the kites coat the string in powdered glass, and there have been children garroted in the street because of running into the kite string. Is India beautiful? Do you know what I mean? At the heart of the question, the children are really grappling with the fact that sometimes beauty hides ugliness, and sometimes ugliness hides beauty. And those kinds of questions, I think, are really important for getting children to think not just about learning, but about the kind of human being that they want to be. When we talk to children, we often say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they'll say, oh, a doctor. I'll go, oh, that's good. You'll need 2 sciences, and you'll need this, and we'll set you up with some work experience. They don't say, what kind of doctor do you want to be? Because the doctors who work in Médecins Sans Frontières are an entirely different species to the ones that worked in the Nazi concentration camps. And I know that's kind of a trite comparison, but we need to be saying to children, what kind of human being do you want to be? What kind of mark do you want to make on the world? What kind of change do you want to be in the world? And those kinds of conversations matter. And we've got to move away from these trite, meaningless references to grit and resilience and character and blah, 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 because actually, without a moral purpose underpinning them, without a goal, they are meaningless, and all of those things could be used to evil ends as well as good ends. Does that make sense? So let's think about kind of not just the language we use, but the way that we're implementing it in our learning. And I'm just going to pop at happiness before I start to give you some practical examples, because I'm a miserable sod. And happiness at the moment is the subject of quite a lot of research, particularly across the United States. And obviously it links into this mental health issue that we mentioned earlier. But interestingly, what they're finding in the Harvard study that they're doing, the Making Caring Common study, is that children don't associate happiness with having a sense of value and purpose within their communities. They associate it more with achieving well, achieving highly. And when you probe them on that, I'll achieve highly so that I can have nice stuff, I can afford to buy things. And that this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle of feeling like you failed if you can't afford to buy certain things. Whereas the psychology into happiness shows us that we feel most happy when we have a sense of purpose, we feel valued, we feel loved, and we give those things to other people. There's a reciprocity, is that the right word, to that process. So how do we put that into our schools? Well, the Max Planck Institute is doing research at the moment to show that empathy and compassion, which underpins that sense of being valued, that sense of purpose, that sense of community, that it can be learned. And they're doing some really interesting stuff about things like mindfulness and meditation and the impact that has on children in developing empathy. I'm also interested, and I've written to them to ask them, about whether this idea of being practiced could be about being in role and taking on the perspective of another human being. But what they're learning is that we don't necessarily, we're not necessarily born with empathy, we learn it and we have to practice it and we lose it when we're under stress. So we've really got to think about the kind of conditions for learning and how we can practice them in schools. And so most of my work has been nicked from this, the mission statement for the International Baccalaureate. The International Baccalaureate runs from primary right through to diploma level at 18, so it's a 3 to 18 programme. And the last sentence of that, or particularly the last line of that, lifelong learners who understand that other people with their differences can also be right, really jumps out at me every time I see it. Because all the world's problems would pretty much go away if we could understand that other people with their differences could also be right. So how do we do that? How do we put that into our classrooms? First thing is we stop doing this. This is little boys learning to swim in the 1930s. That's grit. The one on the bottom's getting grit in their elbows and their knees. But we laugh at it because we go, oh, there's no water. But then I think this is spag, isn't it? Isn't taking anything out of context and completely drying it to a point of meaningless activity. Isn't that what we're doing with areas of the curriculum, atomising and isolating areas of the curriculum and just making them, frankly, unpleasant? We need to have more of this kind of thing going on in our schools. And about, 13 years ago now, I started working with a chap you might have heard of, Howell Roberts. In Barnsley, and I've gone into that school. I've been asked to go into that school to rewrite their Key Stage 3 curriculum, and Howell was an AST in that school and we worked together on it, and Jane Hewitt as well. And one of the first units we developed was called Identity, and it was about our identity. It was before British values were kind of being rammed down our throats. We said to these children, what is our identity as children in this school and in our community and in our town and in Yorkshire and in the world? And we decided that we'd create a British museum, that it would have a British museum with a Yorkshire flavour. And lots of these kids were bringing in memorabilia from the miners' strike, because obviously in Barnsley that was a huge thing that happened to their families, to their fathers and to their grandfathers. And they were bringing in pieces of coal that their grandparents had brought out of on the last day of their mining and kept. They were bringing in diary extracts, they were bringing in newspaper articles from that period that had really clearly impacted on their families. But we also had, the monarchy and everything else that the children thought was important. And we invited the parents into an exhibition. And I said to the children, in the foyer of the school we should have a statue, because whenever you go to museums, they always have a big statue, don't they, like a dinosaur or something. So I said to them, what will our statue be? And I'm particularly looking at these two boys who are hugging, because they both arrived at secondary school with trouble tattooed on their foreheads. I've been told that they can't work with other people, that they're aggressive, that they are constantly in conflict, that they're probably better off being on isolated tables or kept away from other people. And here they are, and they're hugging each other, and they're saying the caption for our image is tolerance. And I thought, well, that's lovely. But behind me, and I didn't even photograph it because I was so blown away, were some boys saying, Miss, can our statue move? Like, if you give us 10p, which is not unusual in Yorkshire because kids are always trying to scam you out of money. So I found my 10p and I put it down on the floor, and they started off with an image of a cricket game, because England had won the Ashes, which apparently was a big deal. And they'd won the Ashes, but also in the same summer, the 7/7 bombings had happened in London. And they changed when I put my 10p down from bowling to detonating a bomb and people fleeing. And they held it, and I said, well, that's quite a powerful image to have in our museum. What's your caption? And they said, from ashes to ashes. And in that moment, there you go, see? That's why I keep that photo. Because we have to believe
that children will find ways to express themselves in ways that are moving and powerful and meaningful, not just to them but to us. And I think giving them the freedom to explore in those kinds of ways, responsible and structured ways, are really important. Giving them life-enhancing experiences where they meet people who've had life experiences that are entirely different to their own is hugely important. Here's Doris, she's a Holocaust survivor, and she's telling her stories of what it was like to be there. We were there in the Czech Republic on the site of a concentration camp. And the children are writing that, you know, they're going to perform something to try and honour what happened. We want the audience to realise that they should appreciate what they have in their lives and prevent what happened here ever happening again. This is not just, you know, let's put on a play about the Holocaust. This is about them engaging with and understanding the world, how it can change. These are children meeting Ahmed, a Syrian refugee, whose story was so harrowing that as he was telling it, I was thinking, is this really appropriate for children to be listening to? And yet, these children write in response to that. When something bad happens, you have three choices: let it define you, destroy you, or it can strengthen you. They can cope if the structures are there to protect them. So, if we're looking at conscience-led curriculum planning, if we're looking at dilemma-led learning, we have to think about these things working in tandem. Is everything you do, and Jill Wood's a great example of this, I think, from what she said this morning, is everything you do done with the best interests of children in mind? And at what point do you let go of the things that are just simply not in their interests? Is there enough awe and wonder in the curriculum to keep them interested? Because I still think, whatever people say about we should just make them, just tell them, I still think it's really important that we inspire them. Are the things that we do rooted in research? And I don't mean selective research that just accords with our worldview. I mean, do you really understand why you're doing what you're doing, so that if anybody walks into that room, you can say, I have them here doing this because of that. And you can justify everything that you're trying to do. And most importantly of all, are the children being asked to consider bigger questions, bigger than the curriculum, bigger than your lesson objective, bigger than the plan? Because if they're not, then why are we doing this to them? Where are we sending them? Here's just a little piece of writing from a child. He's 11. He's enrolled as a social worker. And we've been reading the book The Switch, and we've looked at this child, Bob Snarby, who's significantly disadvantaged. And we've asked the children to, they've interviewed parents, they've interviewed witnesses, we've gone through a process of setting them up as social workers. They're finally writing a 4-page report. This is just his first paragraph. Physical description of child. The child is classed as well underweight according to his BMI results based on the growth centile chart. His weight is 35 kilograms, his height is 5 foot 1 inches, both below the average height and weight for a child of Robert's age. The boy's local GP reports recurrent severe chest infections as well as certain spots of infected eczema around the leg and groin area. His childhood immunisations are not up to date and he has signs of dental decay. Are not up to date, yes, and he has signs of dental decay, caries and his 2 front teeth missing. His typical diet consists of simple snacks, his personal hygiene appears poor, Robert is pale and his overall appearance suggests his general health is poor and overall is a cause of concern. I am 11 years old and I can write that. That's astonishing, isn't it? Now, obviously I tell him that there isn't a semicolon in there so he can't pass his SATs, but he's not writing that because he wants to get a good mark. He's writing that because he has a sense of agency and it's in role and he knows it's not real, but he has enough of a sense of agency to care about Bob and want to do something about it. And I said to him, I think you've made a mistake there. Caries, did you mean cavities? And he said, no, I went onto the University of Newcastle's dentistry website, and caries is the word that dentists use. And I went, well, that slapped me right down. There we are. That's what you want for children, being slapped. Wolf Rescue, here's year 4. Based on the Ice Palace, a book by Robert Swindles that they'd really enjoyed. They really enjoyed the front cover, and I thought they're massively into wolves. These kids have got to do something about wolves. But I had to teach Russia. So how are we going to bring wolves and Russia together? Well, we set ourselves up as an animal rescue centre. We look at our responsibilities and our duties. We specialise in dangerous animals. And we get a commission from Olga, who lives in a very remote part of Russia, near the Siberian border, to say that there's a child missing, the wolves are being blamed, and she doesn't think that it's their fault. And will the children come and investigate and find out what's happening? The children say no. I'm like, well, that's it, 6 weeks planning, it's gone out. They say no, I say, why? One of them says, we don't speak Russian. Oh, okay, well, we're going to have to learn some then, aren't we? Do you see what I mean? They're telling me what they have to learn in order to go. Well, we haven't got enough money because when we set up our organisation and we looked at the budgets, we realised that we didn't have very much money. Well, we're going to have to do some fundraising. Perhaps we need to write some letters to famous people to get them to send us some money. The children are telling me they have to learn Russian. They need to write letters. Does that make sense? I'm not standing up going, our lesson objective today is to learn some Russian or to write a letter. They're telling me they need to learn it, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to set that up. I give them a rubbish map, and I say, this is where she lives, in the Ural Mountains, and they've got to kind of get a more detailed map. They've got to plan the journey and how we're going to get there and cost it up. It's actually quite hard to get to. So they look at the weather, what we're going to pack. They look at the habitat of the wolves. How far do they roam? How are we going to find the wolves? What are we going to find when we say that? What kinds of people do live there and how are we going to interact with them and speak with them? And they find out that there's an indigenous population and also a kind of migrant population from the cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg who've come in and are mining. And actually what's happening is the wolf's habitat has massively reduced because of the size of the mines. Well, we need to investigate this. We need to have some witnesses. Here's a squirrel who tells us, I'm not a fan of wolves, me, but I'll tell you what, I've never seen them attack a child. So like, oh, okay, maybe we'll see them attack a child. We enlist the help of the golden eagle because we know that our maps are not good enough, and what we want is a really detailed ordnance survey style map of that particular local area, so the children are marking the rocks and the trees and the paths and the caves and the things, the places where a child might be hiding with the help of our eagle. And to cut a long story short, we end up discovering that there's a dead wolf in the forest. Now it's a onesie. They're not stupid. They knew that the tinfoil wasn't fingerprint recognition either. But they decide we need to find out. We need to do an autopsy on this wolf and we need to find out what was in the contents of its stomach. Those bags are empty. There is nothing in them except children's imaginations. And yet what they're asking me is, I don't know if this is human hair or animal fur, perhaps we need to send it to the lab and find out. They're constructing their stories and using heightened language, sophisticated heightened language, because they want to be professional. So at the end of that story, what they found out and what they discovered was that the miners had set up the story because they wanted to expand the wolves. So we have a second problem, we need to relocate them. How do you relocate wolves? How do you negotiate with authorities to get that kind of permission? See where we're going with this? What subject is that? I don't know. I haven't got a clue what subject that is. That's just like wolves in Russia. Let's call them wolves in Russia. That's our subject. Jabberwocky. Why might somebody, a key question, why might somebody leave the safety of their homes and venture into danger? What the heck was that boy thinking about? Going out with his vorpal sword and attacking this monster, the Jabberwock. The children spend 6 weeks on Jabberwocky. They build, it's Lord of the Rings by the time they finish this story. It's not just why he left, it's like what he took with him. We have a massive map on the floor, every point on that journey from slithy toves to borogoves to jub birds is mapped out, and their lairs and their habitats and everything is done. And 6 weeks later, when he comes back with the head of the Jabberwock, everybody's dead pleased, so we throw a party. And we're in the hall, and we've made food, and we're singing songs that we've created, like epic traditional songs of stories of heroes, and we're ritualising his return. And then they get a knock on the door, and a messenger, me, comes in. And that messenger says, it has come to our attention that a member of your tribe has crossed the boundary that marks the ancient peace settlement of 1427. As such, you are in breach of such peace settlement, and we see this as an act of aggression. In addition to this breach of the peace settlement, we have reason to believe that the villain has slain the sacred Jabberwock, a creature that has for centuries been sacred to our way of life. And we see this not only as an act of aggression, but an insult to our way of being. We demand that you hand this man over to us to face our justice system within 24 hours. And for a crime this terrible, nothing short of the death penalty will do. If you refuse to comply with this, this will be viewed as an act of war, and our vengeance on your people will be great. And as you know from our history books, you will not win. Well, now we've got to go and write some history books, haven't we? We've got to find out what the history of these two tribes are. Some of the kids are going, off you go, mate. I know you've gone and signed the Jabberwock and saved us from certain death, but you know, enough's enough, off you go. And some of them are going, we'll go to war! And some of them are going, there must be a third way. And of course, as a teacher, the diplomacy is where I'm hoping to take those children. But that's what you mean by wading children knee-deep in dilemma, by taking them into a situation where there are no easy answers, no easy ways out, where what they thought was good is no longer good, what they thought was bad is maybe not no longer bad, and where they're having to think and feel and act and put those things together. There's our twist there. Here's some children who found a tree in a forest that is massive, and they're working out how old it is. There are formulas for this kind of thing, but they decided to measure it with a metre stick and then look on the internet for circumferences of a similar size. And then they do a timeline. They find out that this tree is probably about between 700 and 800 years old. And I said, well, what if we were in the time of the Tudors? What if we're in 1580? What has this tree seen? And the children realised that actually, if the tree was 700 or 800 years old from today, they would know an awful lot more than they know if the tree is 700 or 800 years old from then. Why is that? We talk about the written word and the way that technology has improved communication, and our histories are written, if they're written down, are remembered better. And to cut a long story short there, basically some landowner asked them to chop it down, and their job is to keep it up and protect it. But within the constraint of, they live in that land, and he owns the land, and he could evict them at any moment. So it becomes an act of subterfuge. How can we persuade him not to use this tree for his door, for his mansion, but without offending him? And that subtlety of communication is really important for children to learn, because they'll need it in work. You know, that subtlety of pretending that to your boss that you're doing what he's asked you to do, or she's asked you to do, and actually going off and doing something different. It's a really important life skill. So, here's one where children are in a jungle, and I said to them, what's happened there? And they talk about the end, you know, apocalypse, it's the end of mankind. It's not actually, it's just American war vehicles left behind in Vietnam. But this is the question they come up with. Would the world be better off without us? And I put them on a continuum and I say, agree, disagree, stand where you think it is. And nearly all of the children go to, we agree actually, we're destroying the planet, we hold our hands up, the world would be better off without us. And there's a little girl standing over there and she says, no, it's not a world without us, it's just a planet. And we give it meaning, and what we've got to learn and what to do is how to look after it. And that is pretty good learning. And you're putting children in a situation where they feel that they've got the agency to do this kind of thing. Now, just before Mick kind of has a couple of minutes here, is that all right? I've kind of taken up all your time. I just want to share this little story with you. And this is going back to the concentration camp. We take a group of students from across lots of different countries to Terezin in the Czech Republic every year at Easter time. And this particular year, there was a story of a composer who had been interned in Terezin and whose dream had always been to perform Verdi's Requiem. And every time you'd get a choir together and practice, the choir would be decimated, they'd be taken off to Auschwitz, and then you'd get new people coming in, and it was a constant turning, a cycle of people dying and being replaced, and dying and being replaced. But eventually, just before he was taken off to Auschwitz, he got Verdi's Requiem performed. And I left these kids alone for 15 minutes and said, honour him.
than that, do you? I'm just going to invite Mick to talk to you for a few minutes. Is that all right, Mick? That's basically what I did.
I'm Mick Waters, if you don't know me. Debra said, would you come along and say a few words at the end? And I sort of sat here thinking, what do you say, really? It's been really smashing.